Welcome to another deep dive. We're taking a look at the Quran's blueprint for self-development. You've been exploring some cool ideas from the Quran, God's message to mankind, the New Millennium Exposition,
The NME.
right, and the Divine Blueprint, both by Paigam Mustafa. We're about to uncover a fresh perspective on life's purpose and personal growth, so get ready for some aha moments.
Absolutely. These texts offer a really unique lens through which we can, examine our own journeys, individual journeys.
Okay, so let's dive in. We often hear that the purpose of life is to be happy,
Right.
but these sources suggest a deeper meaning.
Yeah, they challenge that notion, that simple notion that happiness is the ultimate goal. Instead, they present a very compelling argument that life is about continuous development, a journey of growth that encompasses all of us, our physical, mental, and spiritual selves.
You mentioned the self.
Yes.
What exactly do you mean by that, and how is it different from our minds or bodies?
That's a great question. The self, as described in these texts, is our core essence, distinct from the physical body and the thinking mind. It's the part of us that continues to evolve even after death.
And so it's like our spiritual core, the essence of who we are,
Yeah,
beyond the physical and mental aspect.
precisely. And just like we nourish our bodies
Yeah.
with food and exercise,
Yeah.
the self needs its own kind of nourishment and training for development.
Fascinating. This reminds me of that quote by G.G. Simpson. He said that what distinguishes humans from other animals is not just our intelligence, but our capacity for self-awareness and moral development.
Right.
It's almost as if we're human beings, upgraded.
That's a brilliant connection. And if we think about the self in this way, then the Quran and the Divine Blueprint offer a guide to achieving that upgrade, so to speak. They provide a framework for nurturing and strengthening ourselves.
So what kind of training does the self need?
The texts really emphasize that challenges and obstacles are actually crucial for the development of the self. They're not meant to discourage us, but to refine us, like a sculptor chiseling away at a block of marble to reveal the masterpiece within.
Speaking of challenges shaping us, the source material uses a very powerful analogy of a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly.
Yes.
Can you walk us through that?
Of course. Imagine a caterpillar, its whole existence seemingly limited to crawling and munching on leaves. Then it encases itself in a cocoon, seemingly disappearing. But inside, a profound transformation is taking place.
It's breaking down its old form to create something entirely new.
Exactly. And finally, it emerges as a beautiful butterfly, capable of flight, experiencing a whole new dimension of life. This process mirrors the journey of the self. We face challenges, we go through periods of introspection and struggle. But through these experiences, we emerge, transformed, ready for a higher level of existence.
That's a beautiful and powerful image. So the Quran NME suggests that we should actually welcome challenges as opportunities for growth.
Yes. And that's where Paigam Mustafa's interpretation of the Quran really shines. He emphasizes that the Quran isn't just a set of rules, but a guide for this continuous process of self-development, urging us to face difficulties with courage and determination, knowing that they are ultimately shaping us for the better.
So if we face these challenges head on, what is it that we're ultimately trying to develop?
Yeah.
Within ourselves, what's the end goal?
According to the source material, it's about cultivating what Paigam Mustafa calls permanent values, essential qualities that shape our character and guide our actions, ultimately leading to a more fulfilling life and a stronger self.
So it's not just about navigating this life,
Yeah.
but preparing for what comes after.
That's an interesting point. These texts certainly point to a connection between our actions in this life and the state of ourselves in the next.
And what exactly are these permanent values?
Yeah.
Are we talking about virtues like honesty, compassion, justice?
You hit the nail on the head. These values, often considered universal, are presented in the Quran NME as fundamental building blocks for a thriving self. But what's unique about Paigam Mustafa's approach is that he connects these values to specific verses and stories from the Quran.
So he's providing a practical framework, grounded in the Quran's teachings, for developing these qualities.
Precisely. For instance, he uses the story of the prophet Joseph to illustrate the importance of patience and forgiveness. Despite facing betrayal and hardship, Joseph remained steadfast in his faith and ultimately achieved a position of power and influence.
It's like a case study from the Quran for cultivating these permanent values.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes the New Millennium Exposition so compelling. It takes these ancient stories and shows us how they hold timeless wisdom, for navigating the complexities of life and becoming better versions of ourselves.
So we're not just reading about these values in the abstract,
Right.
but seeing them embodied in the lives of prophets and other figures from the Quran.
Right. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of the NME, its use of literary examples to illustrate the development of the self.
Oh, I love when different fields of knowledge intersect like that.
Me too.
What kind of examples does he use?
He draws on a wide range of sources, from classic literature to popular culture. For example, he uses the story of Pinocchio, the wooden puppet who longs to become a real boy.
That's so interesting. I never thought about Pinocchio in that context.
Yeah.
What's the connection to self-development?
Well, Pinocchio faces a series of challenges and temptations.
Right.
He has to learn to distinguish right from wrong,
Uh-huh.
to be truthful and courageous. His choices directly impact his transformation into a real boy, highlighting the power of our actions in shaping who we become.
It's a powerful reminder that every choice we make, no matter how small, contributes to the development of ourself.
Exactly. And he contrasts this with the tale of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which explores the duality of human nature and the constant struggle between our better and worse selves.
Dr. Jekyll, a respected doctor, transforms into the monstrous Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
representing the potential for both good and evil within it all.
Precisely. And through this stark example, Pegah Mustafa reminds us that the journey of self-development is not always easy or straightforward. There will be times when we stumble and make mistakes, but it's through those experiences that we learn and grow.
So it's about recognizing that setbacks and mistakes are part of the process, not a sign of failure.
Exactly. And the Quran Enemy encourages us to approach these challenges with a spirit of self-reflection and a commitment to continuous learning and improvement.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking.
Mm-hmm.
But we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
So we've been exploring this idea that life is a process, a process of continuous development, a journey of refining ourselves, not just about seeking happiness.
Right. And we've seen how the Quran Enemy uses both real-life examples from the Quran and fictional stories to kind of illustrate these concepts.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is how Pegah Mustafa connects these ideas to a broader spiritual framework.
Okay.
He argues that our actions in this life have implications, beyond our immediate experience.
So it's like we're constantly training ourselves, not just for this life, but for something more.
Exactly. He uses a really, really interesting analogy in The Divine Blueprint. He compares our lives to a play with two stages.
Okay.
The first stage is our earthly existence, where we're constantly making choices and shaping ourselves.
Uh-huh.
But the second stage, he suggests, is the afterlife, where the consequences of those choices become more apparent.
Okay, that analogy definitely makes you think.
Yeah.
But if our actions are shaping ourselves for the next stage, how do we know what choices to make? It can feel overwhelming.
Right. That's where the concept of permanent values comes in. These values, as presented in the Quran Enemy, act like a compass, guiding us towards choices that contribute to the development of a strong and resilient self.
So it's not just about following rules blindly, but about developing a strong inner compass guided by these permanent values.
Precisely. And Pegah Mustafa emphasizes that these values aren't arbitrary. They're deeply rooted in the Quran's teachings and reflect the divine attributes.
Can you give us an example of how a specific permanent value is connected to the Quran?
Certainly. Let's take the value of generosity. In the Quran Enemy, Pegah Mustafa points to the story of Prophet Abraham, known for his unwavering hospitality and willingness to share, even in times of scarcity. His generosity wasn't just about material wealth, but about extending kindness and compassion to everyone, reflecting God's, infinite mercy.
So by cultivating generosity within ourselves, we're not only benefiting others, but also aligning ourselves with the divine attribute.
Exactly. And that's a powerful motivator for self-development. It's not just about self-improvement for its own sake, but about becoming more like our Creator.
This raises an interesting question for me. If these common values are so important, why is it that we often struggle to embody them consistently?
That's a question that Pegah Mustafa addresses directly in The Divine Blueprint.
Yeah.
He acknowledges that we all have weaknesses and that the journey of self-development is filled with challenges and setbacks. He even compares it to, the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Right.
We all have the potential for both good and evil within us, and it's a constant struggle to choose the path of virtue.
So we shouldn't be discouraged if we fall short sometimes. It's about acknowledging our imperfections and striving to do better.
Absolutely. The key, according to the source material, is to cultivate a sense of accountability.
Accountability to whom?
First and foremost, to ourselves. We need to take responsibility for our actions and recognize that our choices have consequences.
But there's also this idea of accountability to a higher power, right?
Yes, and in the context of the Quran enemy, that higher power is God. Paigam Mustafa argues that acknowledging our accountability to God can be a powerful motivator for striving to embody these permanent values.
It's like knowing that we're ultimately answerable for our choices. Inspires us to make better ones.
Precisely. And it connects back to that two-stage play analogy. Our choices on this earthly stage are not just about our present happiness or success, but about shaping ourselves for what comes next.
That's a pretty profound way of looking at things. It shifts our perspective from a focus on, immediate gratification to a longer-term vision of growth and purpose.
And what's really beautiful about the Quran enemy is that it doesn't present this idea of accountability as something burdensome or fear-inducing. Instead, it's framed as a source of hope and motivation.
So instead of feeling like we're constantly being judged, it's more about recognizing that we have the potential to improve and that our efforts are meaningful.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really uplifting concept that Paigam Mustafa emphasizes the idea that heaven begins here.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does he mean by that?
He argues that we don't have to wait until the afterlife to experience the joy, peace, and fulfillment that are often associated with heaven.
We can cultivate those qualities right now
Yeah.
in this life.
Precisely. By striving to embody the permanent values, by making choices that align with our higher purpose, and by connecting with something greater than ourselves, we can create a sense of heaven on earth.
So it's not about denying ourselves earthly pleasures. We're about finding a deeper meaning and purpose in our experiences.
Exactly. And that's what makes the Quran enemy so empowering. It reminds us that we have the agency to shape our own destiny and create a life filled with meaning, both in this world and the next.
This whole idea of continuous development and shaping ourselves is incredibly thought-provoking. But what about the Quran enemy itself? What makes Paigam Mustafa's interpretation unique?
So we've been unpacking some pretty profound concepts from the Quran enemy and the divine blueprint, this idea of the self, its continuous development, and the role of permanent values in that journey.
Yeah, and we've also touched on how Paigam Mustafa uses, scriptural and literary examples to bring these concepts to life. What I find particularly interesting is his emphasis on the Quran as a guide for this whole process of self-development. How does he make that connection so clear in the NME?
Well, one of the key things he does is highlight the importance of context. He argues that many traditional interpretations of the Quran have become kind of detached from the historical and social circumstances in which it was revealed.
So he's advocating for a more nuanced understanding of the Quran's message.
Exactly. He encourages readers to really delve into the historical context of each verse and to consider the specific audience it was addressing. This helps us to grasp the deeper meaning and relevance of the Quran's teachings for our own lives.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like understanding the background of a story. Helps you appreciate its message more fully.
Precisely. And by placing the Quran's teachings within their proper context, Paigam Mustafa reveals how they offer practical guidance for navigating the challenges of life and cultivating a strong and virtuous self.
This approach reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, the idea that the Quran is not just a book of rules, but a guide for living a meaningful and fulfilling life.
Yes. And Paigam Mustafa really emphasizes that this guidance is relevant, not just for Muslims, but for all of humanity.
That's a powerful statement. How does he support that claim in the NME?
He argues that the Quran's message is universal in its appeal, because it speaks to the fundamental needs and aspirations of the human soul. He points to the Quran's emphasis on justice, compassion, and the pursuit of knowledge as principles that resonate across cultures and belief systems.
So even though the Quran was revealed within a specific, historical and cultural context, its message transcends those boundaries and offers wisdom for all people.
Exactly. And that's what makes the Quran enemy so compelling. It presents a very fresh and accessible interpretation of the Quran's teachings, highlighting their relevance for our modern world and inviting us to embark on a journey of self-discovery and spiritual growth.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking discussion. For our listeners who are feeling inspired to learn more, where would you recommend they start?
Well, I would certainly encourage them to explore the Quran and ME for themselves. Paigam Mustafa's writing is, very clear, very engaging, and thought-provoking. It's a great starting point for anyone who wants to delve deeper into the Quran's message and its implications for personal growth.
And for those who want to take their exploration even further.
The Divine Blueprint is a wonderful companion piece to the NME. It delves into some of the key concepts in more detail, offering practical guidance for applying them to daily life.
This deep dive has truly opened my eyes to a new way of understanding the Quran and its potential to guide us on our journeys of self-development.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And for our listeners, we encourage you to continue diving deep into the Quran NME and the Divine Blueprint and discover for yourselves the transformative power of their message. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge and striving for growth.